Hi, I'm Tyler, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics. In this episode of the show, we're going to be discussing the next in the lineup of the AFI's Top 100 American Films, Bridge on the River Kwai, as well as the newest Disney live-action remake, Christopher Robin. Stay tuned. Welcome to the show, brought to you by Groupthink Productions and FVTV. Joining us once again is Groupthink Productions executive producer Darrin Hummel.
Thank you so much for having me back. I always appreciate it. Good to be here.
Sure thing. And obviously, you being the resident history buff in the room, I thought you would have some fascinating insights on Bridge on the River Kwai. So,
as I was watching Bridge over the River Kwai, particularly as rewatching it and seeing the ending, there was a thought that kind of came to my mind, and this is what, top 20 American Film Institute, top 20, top 25?
this is like top 30?
30, okay.
I don't know.
So
I don't remember.
but it's near the top. And to paraphrase Steve Martin from The Jerk, the AFI hates trains. So I was here earlier. We did The General.
Yes.
The end of The General. Again, spoiler alerts, folks. It's going to be that way.
I did think of The General when I watched that
so
scene.
the end of the movie at The General, the train falls into the water. Bam! No more train. Okay. Go to the end of the Bridge over the River Kwai. Madness, madness. Choo choo. And again,
into the water.
Again, the AFI hates trains.
I've never heard that quote, but that is amazing.
And I'm sure if I would have gone through a little bit more studiously, which I could have, and I chose not to because I'm a bad man.
It's only the second best quote of trains I can think of. The other one, of course, belonging to intolerable cruelty. But
yes, well, again, that's another piece altogether. So, but Bridge over the River Kwai, the curious thing is, doing a little bit of research, and I appreciate all the folks at Wikipedia that made this possible, is the fact there wasn't really a bridge over the River Kwai. Okay, now. It clearly is based on events that largely did happen. The book is based upon a work of fiction, but certainly based upon what took place during World War II. The Japanese army pushed through much of Southeast Asia. The goal was really, if they could, to get into India, because that would be a huge blow to the British Empire. It would be an enormous source of resources for the Empire of Japan as they were continuing to fight the war. And there was a bridge that was going through Burma with the goal of supplying the Japanese efforts to do that. And they did employ prisoners of war. They did employ large numbers of civilians to make that bridge a reality. And so, from that perspective, there's the historical truth that's involved there, and the historical piece is that large numbers of individuals died to support the Japanese war effort. Large amounts of people died. Over 10,000 prisoners of war were killed trying to chop out that railway through the jungle of Burma. And it was suggested from the Wikipedia link that I saw that upwards of over 80,000 civilians also died. So this is a pretty horrific event. And so if you're trying to think of a more modern comparison of what took place, Steven Spielberg, when he did his, oh good grief, I can't think of the movie now. Also based upon treatment of civilians.
Empire of the Sun.
Thank you so much. Empire of the Sun very much mirrors that, and think about what's going on here. What you see in those films is putting a happy face on the atrocities that it was just awful things that took place. But ultimately, we can at least be rest assured that it was a bit of a, it was based on a historical event.
I don't know if you've seen the Railway Man with Colin Firth, but it goes into that a little bit of a British soldier in Southeast Asia when the Japanese invade and taken prisoner of war, tortured, stuff like that. But does this movie hold up better in the David Lean scale than Lawrence of Arabia in terms of how much you need to know going in? Because I know Lawrence of Arabia, obviously, we talked about that last time. That movie comes with the prerogative that you have to understand T.H. Lawrence and what his role in history is to kind of have a basic grasp on what's going on in the film.
Probably not so much. I think, especially due to the fact that this film came out within, 1957, so 12 years after the end of World War II, so it was fresher in the audience's minds that they knew, basically what was going on, that if they couldn't geographically or they didn't have any clue as far as
what about now,
Kwai. Now, that's an interesting piece because, David Lean made these amazing, huge movies one after another after another. So it started with Bridge Over the Kwai, go to Lawrence of Arabia, early 60s. A few years later, it's Zhivago. And each of them have Alec Guinness.
Of course. This is like his trilogy.
Exactly. But of course, then there's David Lean then did Passage to India in the early 1980s and got to bring back Alec Guinness again because he could. Now, and that's a really good question because I don't have a good feel for that. I don't think you need to be really grounded in World War II to understand what's going on. That you can get a sense of the Japanese army and what they're trying to do, the POWs, and trying to survive and trying to deal with what they're dealing with. And then we even haven't talked about William Holden's character as the American who escapes the camp and then returns to try and blow the bridge up.
Yeah, I think that we haven't even talked about like the interesting drama of the film. That is Alec Guinness's sudden desire to build the bridge and to kind of outclass his Japanese captors, and that creates the central conflict of the film. That being Alec Guinness's desire to, I guess you could say, upstage his prisoners, or the people that are holding him in as soldiers prisoners, by building an extremely nice bridge. And it gets to the point where I don't want to spoil the ending because his final line.
Already did.
Well, if there's a bridge in a film and you're building it and it's set in war, you can assume that the bridge is going to go down at some point. And
I just stab at it.
Yeah, you can take a guess, and that's going to. But the conflict of the film ultimately builds up to the final seconds of the film where that does happen, and all the characters you start seeing their alliances shift, and you start realizing who's been right and who's been wrong the whole time, and it makes you question a little bit, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that.
Absolutely, and that's probably a great place to go. So, the curious thing about this camp is because it's so removed and so in the middle of nowhere, they didn't even bother to put up barbed wire to keep the soldiers in, simply because there's really no place for them to go. And so the idea that William Holden would attempt to escape, and truly he understood that by the various narrows of margins, he did escape, and now he has to go back. When back in the camp, the commanding officer, Alec Guinness's character, the colonel, is trying to keep his troops, the morale of the prisoners of war, up, and then giving them this task. And then using the expertise of his officer staff to make the best darn bridge possible
For the enemy.
Which made absolutely no sense at all. And with all of those things accomplished, that's really the tension there. And in addition to that, what was curious is that, and I can imagine that, you really needed British officers, that the Japanese army made it all the way here without being able to build bridges of their own, and it was just some.
I've heard some analysis of the film that's like one of the themes is like the Japanese were just like, the reason the Japanese lost the war is because they were just throwing things together to win instead of actually putting the time in to win, and that's part of like the long-term strategy as to why the U.S. and the British won the war, is because they had the better long game, as opposed to the Japanese, where we're just literally throwing together bridges that wouldn't stand a train going over them.
Well, that was, again, that was a bit I think taken out of context there, and
Maybe, but yeah,
right.
that's,
So,
that's what I've heard.
and
That's
so-
some of the analysis I've heard. But.
And the actual the actual bridge itself that was built was damaged near the end of the war, and actually didn't even go over the River Kwai. But it was near the River Kwai, but not over the River Kwai. But
and it
again,
didn't fall down.
Right. It was certainly heavily damaged, but it still exists today, and it still handles traffic. But it was just very curious that all those pieces didn't quite all match.
I wonder if, if they ever take trains over it and then they just have the trivia. It's like, this is the actual bridge on the River Kwai, but it didn't fall.
Near the River Kwai. Not over, but it's near, and so that's at least it kind of sort of counts.
The river is the true star of the film, obviously.
Well, water is the source of all credits, as the folks from Mystery Science Theater once said.
But yeah, I mean, this is, I would say this is the more accessible of David Lean's films. I mean, I remember the first time I watched it, I thought I was in for a nice, brisk 2-hour film. But no. I was watching the time code, it got to the 2-hour point, and then it said intermission. I was like, no! That's all the time we have for this film discussion. Join us for the next discussion. We'll be discussing Christopher Robin. Stay tuned. Hello, welcome back to the show. So for this segment, we're going to be discussing the Disney live-action Christopher Robin film. So I went into this both very excited and having some trepidations. Like I assume this is kind of be playing off the Hook style of film, where it's going to be like, oh, the adult version of the character comes back and revisits with all his childhood friends thing. And then I watched the trailer, and the CGI Pooh Bear scared me, but. Especially Tigger. Tigger looks he looks off color, so it looks very strange. But
yes, and we were talking about this a little bit last night. So for this movie to work, need to kind of walk through this a little bit here. So one, there has to be a suspension reality because no, all the animals are not going to talk, are not going to perform, and the like. But how do you make this happen? How do you make this work? And that was to me kind of the idea of, well, did I like the movie? And so I thought, the first part of the movie where they're getting into it, and we were reintroduced to, we see the going away. We know the backstory now. We know how Pooh and Christopher Robin, time moves on, and that was the whole point of the original series of books that were created, that children grow up, they move away from their toys, and they made 3 Toy Story movies about that whole point. At what point now that the toy suddenly injects itself back into this man's life? And that, to me, that I thought that piece worked. I thought that reintroduction worked. It was certainly the idea that Pooh suddenly goes through a tree in the 100-acre woods and shows up across the street from Christopher Robin's London flat. That was fun, and then to see the initial reaction and the conversation going on, and people were, did I just see that bear talk?
Which is the best running gag.
And people just completely freaking out, and that's fun. The ending of the movie, when bringing the introduction of the daughter, the wife, to the animals, and it's a whole batch. And so it's not just Pooh, it's Piglet, you mentioned Tigger, we have Kanga and Roo, we have Owl, we have Rabbit, and who am I missing? And Eeyore.
Yeah.
And Eeyore
is the MVP.
Yes, Eeyore absolutely steals the movie, and what you don't realize is that there's some heft to Eeyore because of the way that they're all carrying the poor soul about.
To me, thinking on the film, it struck me that the way this film was going to work ultimately was how well it ultimately reinforces the metaphor it's playing with, and then how it ends. Because that, to me, was going to be, okay, where is this going? Because the whole metaphor is about Christopher Robin, who's... It's somewhat borrowing from the real Christopher Robin, which I do want to talk about briefly. it's borrowing from his life that he lost his parents at a young age, and that he served in war, and then he got married and had a kid. So, and he went to work. So a lot of it comes down to the fact that he had to have his adolescence thrown out very abruptly, and then not only just thrown out, but just stamped on by being a British soldier in the war, World War II. But obviously, when we meet him as an adult, he's very sympathetically adult. Like the movie kind of plays around the idea that being an adult is a burden, but his burdens are very like he has responsibilities. If he doesn't do his job, the entire warehouse is going to lose all their jobs. Right. And that's like the whole thing is like the conflict becomes Winnie the Pooh being like, oh, you're not taking care of your family, you're not living for the moment, you lost touch with your childhood and yourself, and it becomes this very real tension between, if I don't do my job, people are going to lose their jobs, and I need to do this thing and be true to my family. And I was curious where this was going to go, and I don't know if I necessarily think the ending unites it in the most intelligent way, because I think it probably would have been better if it had the Toy Story 3 ending, where if they had actually gone through with that, and Christopher Robin had been like, yeah, I actually can't come back to the 100-acre wood ever again because I have to do this job. I have to move away. I have to do this. But maybe he leaves his daughter, who we see briefly bonding with the toys. Like that would have been like maybe a little derivative, but I think that would have been like the truly tragic ending that the movie is trying to build up to a little bit. But
well, you're not going to have that kind of a tragic ending, a Christopher Robin. It just doesn't work. I did think there were just some wonderful moments where,
if you're doing this for adults, then maybe.
Right. But for adults, there were some wonderful moments where they definitely included things from the animated features, where you had Tigger singing his theme song,
which annoys Eeyore.
Yes.
By the way, I did rewatch the Misadventures of Winnie the Pooh this week to prepare. I forgot how annoying Tigger was. Like, I actually understand Ben Rabbit is like, yeah, we should just kind of put him in the woods.
Let's let him go off by himself. But Pooh Bear was the way they did that. It was wonderful. It was sweet, and I think it was very the characters themselves and the way they acted and the way they interacted with Christopher, and then ultimately the girl and Haley Atwell, which wonderful casting as Christopher Robin's adult wife. But that's not important right now. That all of that is there. That it was just sweet. And that's really the heart of the original book. There was just this, at the heart of it, there was a sweetness, there was an innocence, and it truly captured that. And so if there's some structural failings that, like I said, the middle part of the film just didn't work maybe as well as it could have.
It kind of telegraphs where it's going.
Yeah, and again, that's okay. But I didn't find the ending as disappointing as you did. I
wouldn't say disappointing. I would say that doesn't make this. It doesn't go as tragic as I was hoping it would have. But that's my problem with it. So. Right,
and it was again there was the sweetness there, and they started the film with the childhood Christopher Robin and Pooh, and they ended the film with adult Christopher Robin and Pooh, and I just thought it was just a wonderful progression that we got to see. And if you're looking for folks that are looking for that film where everybody has the opportunity of potentially being entertained, that certainly fits that bill and allows us to do that. I think what's curious here is it's almost really this was done the wrong way, and that the folks that did Goodbye Christopher Robin.
Let's go into this.
They really undercut this film, because Goodbye Christopher Robin really goes into and talks about in a really unflinching way that Christopher Robin was put in a position that no 4 or 5-year-old child should ever have been put into.
You were saying that the point that movies come in twos.
Yes.
Like so, the 2 asteroid movies, 2 White House movies,
the 2 Studio 54 movies.
Yeah.
This is simply what Hollywood does, and oftentimes there's that push. We have to finish before they do.
Yeah.
Our film's not going to work until if it comes out after them. And I have a feeling that maybe Goodbye Christopher Robin, there was that push. We need to get ours out because otherwise we're the Debbie Downer after that.
Yeah.
But to me, it almost, to use the Toy Story term, poisoned the water hole a little bit, simply because the story of Christopher Robin,
the real life,
real life Christopher Robin, and the A. Milne's son, that he was subjected to superstardom as an unprepared child, goes off to boarding school. Oh, hi, Christopher Robin. Oh, we're going to take great care of your son here at this boarding school. Yeah. And just awful what that child was subjected to, and then let alone that he felt it important that he served in the British Army during World War II, and that many young men took that burden and served, and well, he did that as well, and of course, it was found out, guess what, you're Christopher Robin, and so that same experience that he had, and it just followed him virtually all of his life. And what I found fascinating from Goodbye Christopher Robin is that A.A. Milne's son, I don't want any money from this, and went through his life and established a business for himself. Owned a bookstore because that was his passion. Language was his passion, and had a long-standing London bookstore and made his living there and lived very quietly, lived out his years selling the books that he loved.
I mean, yeah, that's the tragic side of it. I mean,
yeah.
And it does make a fascinating counterpiece. I haven't watched it yet.
Mm-hmm.
You told me all about it.
Mm-hmm.
I need to watch it, but it does make a very fascinating counterpiece just to the more magical Disney Christopher Robin, which, as you said, it might actually poison the well a little bit, where it's just like, oh, we're doing a super sweet romantic version where Christopher Robin actually meets the Pooh Bear again, and he has a happy life with Pooh.
And if you see the other one, and it's like, oh, but that's really not him, and that.
This is a fantasy movie.
Right. So the current, just Christopher Robin, just to point this out, he's supposed to be an efficiency expert. And so what's fascinating is, as efficiency expert, he's not being all that efficient because they're threatening to blow up his department, and they're his wife Haley Atwell is complaining about how he's not being very efficient at home.
Oops.
And yes, and so clearly there's some work that needs to take place, and there is growth.
So yeah, that's the whole metaphor of the film. It's the childhood coming in at the right moment to kind of help him work out the solution to how to fix his problems. That's all the time we have for this segment. Join us for the final segment where we'll be discussing his movie recommendation for the week. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to the final segment. We're going to hand things over now for this week's movie recommendation.
Thank you, Tyler. My movie recommendation is what you see right here. It is, and I'll cover up the logo that was put on the old VHS cover.
By Blockbuster Video.
Thank you. Frank Capra, 1930s, Meet John Doe. And it's a fascinating think piece, because if you take it back, what was happening in the late 30s, early 40s, and bring it into today. It's a fascinating story because it really can tie into many of the themes that we're dealing with right now in our society, where you have these media oligarchs and their ability to push ideas onto the public and really force feed it to a public. And so the movie starts out. So let's go through the actors and actresses. We have Barbara Stanwyck, who does an amazing job. She is about to lose her job working at a newspaper, and this is 1930s America. People don't like losing their jobs, and so she's desperate to try and figure out a way that she can keep it, and she stumbles upon this idea of John Doe, an individual that is so disappointed in society that he's dedicated himself, that he's going to throw himself off the tallest building in town on New Year's Eve. And, well, she made the story up. But it sold all kinds of papers. She got to keep her job. So now the newspaper said, okay, that's great. So when's your next story going to be about John Doe? And she had always got, what? I got to do more. Well, she has to find a John Doe, and so they actually had auditions and bringing all these people in, and sure enough, Gary Cooper's character is that guy who they just determined to do that. And for whatever reason, you can't get a Gary Cooper movie in this era without Walter Brennan being in it. It's like one or the other.
He's the Clint Howard of that relationship.
Exactly. And because a couple years later, and I used to have this whole list in my mind, but the only one that can come up to me is Pride of the Yankees, where he's Walter Brennan plays a newspaper reporter to Gary Cooper's Lou Gehrig, but that's not important right now. So the two of them are, for lack of a better term of the day, they're homeless, hobos essentially, going across from town to town. He's trying to prove that he still can pitch and trying to get into minor league baseball, big league baseball, and so and Walter Brennan is basically his catcher, and they have that interaction back and forth. And but that, his role, Walter Brennan's, he knows the true story here, doesn't want any part of it. There's a term that he uses throughout, and I'm trying to remember the correct definition of it. He calls everybody he-lots. And if you're going to call somebody something, that why not? But basically, anybody that is part of the power system at the time. So, getting back to my initial thesis, that this powerful newspaper puts us out there, and all these people come into it, and the more and more they hear about John Doe and read about John Doe, and now that there's a face and a voice, start radio, to John Doe, they can't get enough. And the people that are controlling the newspaper say, you know what, we're going to use this. Not only are we going to sell papers, we're going to create our own political party, the John Doe Party. And so I'm being told to shut up. So with that, the crux of the movie is that dynamic then between John Doe wanting to do what he's supposed to and not killing himself at the end of the movie. So
we were a few seconds away from the cane dragging you off the stage or the music. Turn the music off! I'm still talking! That's all the time we have for this episode of the show. You can find past episodes of the show on the Groupthink Productions YouTube page. You can follow me on Twitter at AntisocialCriti, that's critic without the C at the end of it. And you can find more of my written reviews at Geeks Under Grace. I'm Tyler with the Fox Valley Film Critics. Have a wonderful day.